Okay, thank you everybody for joining us today. My name is Alex, and I'm the KM Program Coordinator at ChatBright. Our information session today will be around knowledge mobilization for policy making. Our speakers today are all members of our network KM committee and meet Keiko, Roberta, Martine, and Arié. Keiko is a PI at ChildBright and the co-lead of the Knowledge Mobilization Program. Roberta is the research associate for the Knowledge Mobilization Program at ChildBright. Martine is a psychologist and a KM lead at TAC. And Arié, who is also a member of the KM committee, is adjunct professor at Toronto Metropolitan University. So thank you for joining, and Keiko, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Alex. Hi, everyone. Good to have you here. Good to see some familiar faces that we haven't seen in a while. This conversation is meant to be a series of short for presentations that will be very short, and we've hopeful lots of time for us to discuss and engage in conversations on how we make knowledge mobilization strategies that hopefully work for policy, and how do we inform policy making through our research. So I've been using this graph for a long time, and I took from a presentation someone else with permission. And I still think it's a good illustration to get us started on the problem that we're dealing with when we talk about research and policy. My apologies if you've seen me using this, or Jonathan Lom is the original author of this. So where am I? You are 30 meters above the ground in a balloon. Oh, you must be a researcher. Yes, how did you know? Because because what you told me is absolutely correct, but completely useless. Oh, you must be a policymaker. Yes, how did you know? Because you don't know where you are, you don't know where you're going, and now you're blaming me. This is a bit too not necessarily an accurate picture, and people should not get offended regardless of if you are a researcher or policymaker. But it's a good illustration, I find, of some of the key problems we see in the interface between research and policy. On the one hand, we researchers, and this is a research network, and we tend to be very grounded in information. We know a lot about our subject matter. We know with a very high level of precision, what's the data, what's the information, where it's coming from. And like the fisherman here, he knows the land, know his fish, know what he's doing, knows the task. While policymakers, they are also very knowledgeable people, but who are in a much more unstable scenario, living in a dynamic environment that changes according to the demands of politics, of many other factors, and Arié will tell you a bit more about it. But also trying to make decisions, or having to make decisions that will be informed by different sources, one of them, and maybe only one of them, being research, but a lot of other factors, the winds, the pressure of the balloon where they are, and a lot of other factors. And often that's the problem in trying to communicate research to policy, is that we don't acknowledge what's in between. So in getting to this, introducing this topic and talking about this with this network, before, and my apologies, I forgot to do this before. I wanted to acknowledge, I was just telling my fellow panelists that I'm arrived just a few hours ago from the Indigenous Disability Canada gathering in Victoria, BC. And it was amazing to recognize, I wanted to recognize what we have to, not only to do a land acknowledgement, I've been everywhere, But as to acknowledge the piece of information or the ground that where we're laying our discussions, me personally, as an immigrant to Canada, have been here for 20 years, trying to I recognize all the unceded territory of different Indigenous peoples and nations that have been here before, and the knowledge that they have to share. I am learning, growing knowledge, trying to grow in knowledge in terms of Indigenous ways of learning and knowing and doing. And I think we all could take our time to recognize that. If you want to recognize what you've been learning about Indigenous ways of learning and knowledge and producing and sharing knowledge on the chat, please feel free to. You can tell where you are coming from and why did you arrive here on the chat, and hopefully we'll have more time to talk and learn about that. That's pertinent to this discussion and to this picture. And often when we are talking knowledge mobilization, we're trying to fill a gap or to bridge different worlds of information, of peoples, of groups, and every one of us and policymakers, families for the context of child right, families of children with disabilities, parent partners, children with disabilities themselves, youth, everybody has a piece of information to contribute, but often the gap that has to be filled at any given time does not fit exactly the rocks that each one of us have, right? So the gap to be filled in the real world is not a perfect gap that will be filled by a research study or even a series of research studies alone. It is filled by a conversation and a compromise between two parts, or often many more than two parts, in trying to understand what's the best and most efficient way to produce that, or to complete this gap and to bridge those two worlds so that everybody can walk through this and actions can be taken. Another barrier you see is a lack of alignment. So often the priorities that we have, the questions that we have on research, and often the questions that we have with families too, even doing the best patient-oriented or partner research with groups of interest parties, the alignment between what we've been producing in studies and what policy needs, the timing where this occurs is often not aligned. By the time we get to the end of a study or of like Child Bride, a series of studies, the policy decisions that have been made already or that need to be made at the time where this encounter occurs often generates a different gap that cannot be fixed easily, and that will not be the result of a straight line or a smooth bridge as we would hope. Another frequent problem is the misuse of information and the fact that the information that is generated in research sometimes is used in ways that are not intended to by decision makers and others, by the media, and by different means. So we have to be careful, we have to be intentional, and we have to be active in the way that we push or that we translate and move evidence especially in the policy scenario. So those are some challenges that come with opportunities, especially opportunities for dialogue. The fact that we are a network that is being funded by government, so we would hope that we do both ways, right? That we generate information that government can use, and I'm saying government very generic way, that health systems can use, education, community, but also that we learn by what's happening in the world or what are the needs of the systems, and that we can respond to that. Trying to find a balance between that is not easy. Ariel will give you more insights into that. We always hope that there would this ideal balanced relationship between the importance of the evidence, which is very dear to us, and the importance of the context. They will meet and align, and they will have this balanced evidence-based health policy systems. That's not always the case. But we know that strategies that work for knowledge mobilization, things like having strategies that are tailored according to the needs of the public, multi-component, looking at different strategies, providing access to research, improving skills, working with the systems to improve the systems and generate research that informs the system, and also interaction. And that I will put a big highlight in this part. A lot of it is about relationships. Having interactive workshops supported by goal focus, monitoring, conversations, genuine collaborations. That is true for any partnership in knowledge mobilization, and it's not different for policy. And create systems that support this cross-sector collaboration. So create a space where there is an active and ongoing and dynamic response between the research universe and the decision-making universes. And that generates, those are a few of the policy opportunities I had, especially in the context of the United Nations Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities. But with parents and families, some of you may know, and some of you may be here, don't know, but that we had the chance to be responsive to organizations, to the government of Canada, to the UN, to the WHO, to other organizations, just by being ready and attentive to the needs and trying to generate information that responds to those needs. That's the context in which we created the Policy Hub at Childbright. And I will give the word to Roberta to talk a little bit about the Policy Hub.
Thank you, Keiko. Thank you, everybody, for attending this session. So I'm Roberta Cardoso. I'm a research associate working at a Knowledge Mobilization Program for the Childbright Network. And I'm going to talk a little bit about the Policy Hub today. Next, Keiko, please. So what's the Policy Hub, right? So Policy Hub was created as an initiative to for a rapid response unit to policy needs. And sometimes when I talk to research teams, they you say to me, so I don't have a policy need or a policy-related outcome when it comes to my project. And the way I respond that is by saying that look at your project and your goal. So if your goal is to increase opportunities for youth with disabilities, promote inclusion, access to health care system services, or training health professionals, so you could potentially have a policy need or a policy-related outcome. So I'd like you guys to take a time to think about it and really try to understand your goals and see if you have or not a policy need. And then when we talk about policy makers, most of the time people think about politicians, right? So another thing that you need to have in mind is that a policymaker in the context of Policy Hub, it's someone who is responsible for making decisions, approve policies and guidelines, not so much, you know, a policy maker that is like working the federal government, for example. Next, please. So what's the goals of the Policy Hub? So we'd like to support evidence-informed decision-making about health systems issues for children with disabilities and their families. We are forming a network of partners, and then Martin is going to talk to you guys a little bit about TAC, which is a network that we are engaged with some activities. And then another thing that is our goal is to identify potential policy actions and then inform policymakers about evidence-based recommendations. So we do that by talking to our partners and people with lived experience or steering committee. So we all try to be you know, as much as informed as possible because when you talk about policy actions, it need to be timely. So it's not for yesterday, it's not, it's for today. So we need to be fast when it comes to policy. So who we are? So we are a team of diverse people. We all embrace inclusion with representation, and we all have the same interest with is address health systems issues for children with disabilities in their families. Next, please. So the Policy Hub is formed for basically 3 arms. So we have the steering committee, which is a team that's responsible for providing input in the Policy Hub strategies. We have the working group, that's a team that contributed Policy Hub by conducting assigned tasks. And we have what we call a advisory team, who is comprised by experts, civil society organizations, healthcare systems administrators, and they are consulted by us in a needed basis. Next, please. So what we do? So we support evidence policy, informed policy, and we have tools for it. So we do create lay language materials. We do publish in the scientific journals. We create toolkits, knowledge synthesis such as policy reviews, desk reviews. We do partner with organizations, with government entities. We do organize citizen panels, just to cite a few. Next, please. And then if you need help, the Policy Hub, it's ready for you. So send an email and I will be happy to assist you. Next then. Thank you so much. That was.
And now, yeah, we will pass the floor to Arya. You're muted, Arya. You're muted.
Thank you. I'm just going to put up my slides and we'll get started. Thanks again for the opportunity to talk today. What I want to do is very briefly, given our time, go over what I would describe as flipping the discussion a little bit. So I'm not going to talk about evidence-based policy. I'm going to talk instead about policy-based research. So that this discussion is really to explain a little bit, based on my background, what the policy development process looks like and what that means to you as researchers if you have an interest in working with policymakers. Goes back to Keiko's point about the interaction and relationship. In order to have a relationship, you need, I think, to understand a little bit about each other. So the first thing is really, what is policy? I'm going to go fairly quickly through these slides, but we have time later to discuss if people have some more questions. So policy basically is a course of action or inaction chosen to address a problem or set of problems. 3 main words here: action or inaction. Policymakers do not have to do anything about the problems you may be researching. And if they do something, it's a decision that's made. Even the decision to do nothing is a decision, obviously. So understanding a little bit that there's a whole world of policymaking that operates on its own set of rules. These are some of the features of a policy development process, I guess you can call it. This is not from a textbook. This is from my experience, which includes many years working in the Ontario government education, children and youth services. I had direct responsibility for policies related to autism spectrum, children and youth mental health, complex special needs, child welfare system in Ontario, and a few other things, including the first poverty reduction strategy. So this is my description of policymaking. It's very rational. By that I mean, you can actually understand how it works, and you can understand who the players are in any policy cycle. It may not seem rational to people on the outside, but inside it's rational and understandable, and people's names are attached to it all. The second is, and I put this in because although it's sort of obvious, it sometimes gets forgotten, policy process is political because the decision makers on any important policy or program are politicians. Politicians are interested in being politicians, which means being elected, so they have an interest and a responsibility for major decision making. It doesn't, both of these does not mean that it's predictable. It can be very fluid, it can happen quickly, it can happen slowly. It's understandable, but not necessarily a process that is the same in every policy or program dilemma. That's because these processes almost always start with a problem. And problems can be presented in a whole variety of ways, and they may be connected to small problems, fixable problems, what is often called wicked or very difficult to solve problems. The other thing to be aware of is that for the most part, put aside what I would describe as chaos in the US government cycle right now, put that aside for a moment, but politicians for the most part are risk averse. They don't want to make mistakes. And that means that presenting of options is built into the policy cycle. It's not yes, no to one proposition. It's let me see what's possible and let me see what the consequences of those are before we make a decision. Because the criteria might be cause as little fuss as possible, not do what the research says. That brings me to what I consider the most important learning if we're interested in closing the gap between research and policy. And that is, these two processes, research and policy, have some important differences. One has to do with the decision-making process, and the other has to do with the definition of evidence. So when we talk about evidence-based policy, it has always been evidence-based. It's just that policy decision makers have a different definition of evidence. It's really input to them. Research is one of many sources of input. And if you want to raise research to a higher priority, I'm going to give you a couple of hints in one moment. So decision-making, of course, is also different. Decisions, major decisions in policymaking are made by politicians. Major decisions about the quality or process of research are largely made by peers, research peers in that field. Those are not the same dynamics. Working with peers and working with politicians are not the same dynamics. That's nothing we do is going to change what I've just described on page 4. That's just reality. So tactics, relationships in the form of co-production, network communication are really important. The key here in my mind is to develop a relationship that answers this question for the policymaker, a practitioner, decision makers. Why should I listen to you? Why should I, and literally these are the words of politicians, why should I as a politician listen to you as a researcher? I have lots of other people to listen to, lots of people. Some of them are stakeholders, some of them are other politicians. Learn about those other people that have importance to the policymaker. Establish, if possible, relationships and allies amongst other stakeholders. And those allies should be inside government and outside government. I was a civil servant. I had relationships with researchers. I obviously also had relationships with the politicians and senior people who made decisions. Relationships with me are as important as relationships with politicians. And the other thing, and I'll give an example in a moment, I'm just going to take one extra minute, is involve policymakers or start these relationships very, very early. Not when you've already decided on your research. That may already preclude any connection to the work government is doing. Quickly, educate, mediate, translate, influence. What is your goal here? To educate policymakers, to influence them, to change policy? That should be connected to whatever relationships and tools and products you put together. Is there a problem the government wants to solve that is related to your research? If not, you're going to have a hard time getting anybody to listen to you. They have a list of problems and priorities, and they talk about them all the time. Some of them you might be interested in as a citizen, some you might have an interest in as research. If your areas of interest aren't on their list of priorities, you have to start working very, very early and at a very beginning stage to get your topic on the agenda. If it's already on the agenda, you have a head start. Is it short-term or long-term need? And that's connected to the research cycle as well, which can be very long-term. If a government's interested in implementation, then it's not going to line up with the results of your research if you've just started a long-term research project. Some quick approaches. Ontario Child Health Study. You're probably familiar with some of these things. McMaster-based, fascinating research study on mental health status of kids and adolescents. I was contacted very early in the process before the research questionnaires were even determined. The questions to be asked to the research were even determined. That's very early conduct, and it made me very interested in the value of that research for policymaking in kids' mental health. If they're interested in my input, I'm interested in their output. ICES's mental health baseline, they did research on the children's mental health strategy very early on. The baseline exercise was a very smart strategic decision in terms of what can a research institute do. Do research that helps the government. If you set a baseline, then that helps the government make decisions about whether we're making progress or not. Lots of different ways to get engaged. Lit reviews, option analysis, implementation advice, not just basic research. Expert groups, turnaround schools. If we have time, I can talk later in a discussion about turnaround schools. Fascinating example about the intersection of research and policy. Last point, I know I've taken too long. Policy never stops. This is literally milestones in the autism spectrum, the sort of policy work and program work in the Ontario government. I got involved in about 2007. I was on this file for about 10 years. Many decisions were made over that time. They're still being made. It's never too late to get involved. There's always something on some of these files that is happening. It's not a one-time exercise. It goes to my thinking of, if I'm involved in this for a decade, I wouldn't mind having some researchers involved for a long term as well, because then we automatically will start to influence each other. I'm stopping there. I know it's taking too much time, but thanks very much.
Thank you so much, Arya. That's super insightful. Give the floor to Martine to talk a bit of the community experiences and the networking with tech.
Okay, hi everyone. I'm just going to get this started here. All right. So good morning, everyone. So my name is Martine Habra, and I work for the Transforming Autism Care Consortium, or TAC. I'm sorry, I'm a little bit congested this morning, so hopefully my voice kind of keeps its steady course throughout this presentation. So TAC, I'm going to spend a bit of time talking a little bit about TAC for people who may not know who we are. So we are a Quebec-based research network that focuses on autism and neurodevelopment. And we have a mission to connect and mobilize research strengths in Quebec to improve the quality of life for autistic individuals people with other neurodevelopmental conditions and their families. The network has been in existence since 2017 and continuously funded by the Fonds de Recherche du Québec en Santé, which is our provincial health research funding body. And we've been also very lucky to have other philanthropic partners who have supported our network and have co-developed many of the programs that we run to this day. So we have, in terms of membership, over 100 researchers across the province in about 19 universities and research centers, over 250 graduate students, master's and PhD level, and postdoctoral fellows, and importantly, over 350 community members. So community members can be people with lived experience, family members, caregivers, clinicians, decision maker, managers, and so on, who have an interest in being involved in research. And our research areas really span the spectrum of genomics to animal models of research to, for example, educational interventions in school settings and so on. In terms of our overall goals, I am not going to spend too much time on this. I want to get to the KM part quickly, but I just want to give you a sense of the span of activities. So we're working on development of open science resources in autism and neurodevelopmental research, support multidisciplinary research, support the development of cross-sector research partnerships. That's a big one also for us. Also, big mandate is the training program. And then our knowledge mobilization activities, for which we've developed the Partners for Change program. And that's what I'll spend the rest of the time talking about today. So the Partners for Change program essentially was started a few years ago, and its core aim is to make sure that research can be used as a driver for social innovation in response to community-based need. So the idea was to kind of bring together the researching community, the academic world and the community-based world a little bit closer so that research could better respond to needs. And here, research I'm talking about in the very large sense. So of course, we can talk about research projects and its methodologies, but we can also talk about, of course, scientific evidence as a way to respond to local needs. And here I've got some photos of different KM activities that we've held over the past few years. So initially as a pilot, we really focused the activities of Partners for Change around a partnered research funding program. The idea was that we wanted to make sure that the research findings that were generated from the funded projects really were built to respond to community-based needs and generated evidence that could then be used by the community partner. This program was developed in consultation with our members, researchers, community members, supporters, and individuals with lived experience. And I'll give you a bit of a sample of the projects that we funded in the past couple of years. So some of them are linked to employment and integrating passions and interests in the employment process for autistic adults, how to make mainstream high schools more inclusive. And some that were so we never imposed kind of a theme for the research projects. What they really needed to do was bring together in a partnered way an academic expert and a community-based expert around a community-based need. But you see that some of them, I've highlighted in blue, this one, that was from the get-go, partnered with policy implications in mind. So this was on minority language use and barriers to equitable healthcare for autistic individuals. But really, most of these, we could really draw some policy implications as Roberta was mentioning that, when we're focused, sorry, this is moving on its own, sorry. When we're focusing on inclusion and accessibility and so on, then we can draw clear policy implications as well. So after we finished our pilot, we decided we wanted to think a little bit about how we could the program could evolve, how we could expand impact beyond individual research projects, and enhance specific engagement opportunities with specific audiences like policymakers, practitioners, and the general community as well. We wanted to create impact around emerging priorities, and I'll get back to that in a couple of minutes. We also wanted to catalyze the network and mobilize the larger community over a sustained period of time around these specific themes. So what we are in the process of developing, and this is in development, so if there's any feedback or whatnot that you want to share, I would love to hear it. So we're creating what we're calling our Partners for Change campaigns. So these will be, and they're knowledge mobilization campaigns. That's really the way to look at them. They will be structured set of activities over a specific period of time, for us about 18 months, that will highlight awareness and mobilize action around really important areas, vital areas of research and also community need in autism and neurodevelopmental conditions. So the 4 themes are early identification and intervention, mental health, inclusion and autonomy, and by that I mean really kind of the transition to adulthood, so employment, housing, social inclusion, and aging, for which there is a big dearth of research findings, but it is really important to actually to stimulate data around this area and evidence. And as I mentioned before, targeting specific audiences with around these 4 themes. So very briefly, the idea is that for each campaign, we would have, map and mobilize expertise in the ecosystem. In part, this would be done by putting in place a committee of intersectoral experts around that theme that would help guide the process. We would have targeted engagement via KM events. And we're really excited to be developing a partnership around the policy piece with the Policy Hub, as mentioned before. But we also do want to continue to support capacity building for partnered research in Quebec. And so we're hoping with this that we'll expand awareness and engagement with our different audiences, really create opportunities for knowledge sharing and learning, bring together different publics around common topics so that different perspectives can be heard, create opportunities for new research partnerships as well. And importantly, reinforce network connections, because the idea with this is that we really want to harness the power of a network to go out, reach its members, and kind of mobilize them around these key topics to facilitate the integration of evidence into practice and policy. So that's it. I'm happy to take any questions on any. Oh, and this is our fabulous team, our network directors, Mayada Alsabag, who's at McGill University, and Mélanie Couture, who's at the University of Sherbrooke. And our team members of the TAC team were located at the Neuro at McGill in Montreal. Thank you.
Thank you, Maxine. Thank you, everyone. So now we open the floor for questions. That's a good quick overview of a lot of initiatives and strategies. Would be great to hear from you. So maybe you can stop sharing, Martin, and people can open their cameras if they want to speak. You can share your questions on the chat, but it would be lovely if you just unmute yourself and speak up. What are some questions that come to mind? Or thoughts to share?
I might have one already. This was very insightful. Thank you very much. I was just wondering, in terms of the types of tools that you use to connect with policymakers, what are some of those tools that you find are effective in translating your evidence or knowledge to policymakers, bring them to their attention, bring it to their attention?
Maybe I'll let Arya, do you want to take that?
So what has sort of been, I've been out of the business for a few years, so I'm not 100% up to date on what works. But what has generally been quite effective is old-fashioned, but currently they're described as very short summaries of the best practices in a certain area. So it's a combination of a literature review and a kind of curated summary connected to a particular problem. So, just following up on that presentation, early identification and intervention for kids on the spectrum is an important policy issue, not just a practice issue, not just an issue for parents and kids themselves. So what is the latest knowledge about effective practice? But how you present that is the product question. Deciding to present that is a strategy question. The product has to be succinct, and it has to be timely. It has to be tied to when it's needed. That's why the relationship is important. The other thing, I know this is going to sound a bit blunt, but don't overuse the word research. Just talk about value. What changes were produced in kids, just to use that example. Research is not a particularly useful way to headline your activities. Quality, effectiveness, efficiency are better ways to headline it. That's the short version.
Yeah, go ahead, Robert. That's a very comprehensive answer, Arya. Thank you. Roberta, do you have something to add?
Yeah, I would agree with Arye. I don't think it's old-fashioned, Arye. We're still doing it. So I will give an example. What we did with Bill C-35 was an act about early learning and childcare in Canada. It happened this year, so it's not too old-fashioned, as I said. So it was brought to attention by a parent who is part of the steering committee that the bill was about to, passing in the Senate, and then we have to do something because there's not enough about children with disabilities in the bill. So what we did, a rapid review on, best practices on, early learning child care in a couple of countries that usually use the States, Australia, New Zealand, and Europe. And we did a brief. It's like 2 pages long, and we sent by email to all senators that are involved, some stakeholders that we know. And then what happened is they end up inviting as witness some of parents and organizations that organizations that are around children with disabilities. So in fact, one of our steering committee members, who is a parent, was invited by this Senate to, as a witness. So that was a win-win for us. So it got from, the rapid review to someone that is close to us, to being a witness and let them know what's important for children with disabilities.
Yeah, I think the biggest, most efficient tool, like other than having the formats like short, concise, I think the relationship part and being what Arya said, like if you start early conversations and let your research be also informed. I know we want policy makers. We always want someone to take what we are doing and make it something, a decision based on that or informed by that. But we also, the more we get to do research that is informed by policy needs and the world real needs. I think that's also what Arya said is precise. Like if we receive insights and real conversations and engagement from decision makers at several levels, because it's not also policy makers like in government, but the health systems, like managers, people who are doing and implementing things that have an impact on people. I think that the relationship part of it is essential, as an essential tool as it is to produce the summaries and decision guidelines and put the information in formats that are relevant. I see Simone. You have a question?
Yeah, thank you. I was just wondering what the panel's advice is, and maybe particularly Aria, in terms of how do we navigate the government in terms of like who do we need relationships with? How do we work out who to build relationships with, both inside the government and outside the government, and working out what their priorities are and how we can sort of match our priorities with their priorities?
I can start that if you want, and
Go ahead,
people might have other experiences. So I'll do the easy part first, which is how do you find out what governments are interested in? Well, they talk about it all the time. They're interviewed all the time. They have news releases all the time. They have election platforms all the time. They're not exciting reading, and it's even worse trying to write them. But that's the easiest way to get started. It doesn't necessarily give you the name of a person, but it gives you the name of the place in government. So I would suggest, as a very basic, subscribe to the government's news releases. I mean, you'll get a lot of junk, but you can fine tune, at least in Ontario, you can decide which ministries you want to hear from, and you'll know what they're up to. Now, if you want a preview, that's where you have to go to the websites of the political parties to see what they're talking about, which is not quite the same as what the government's talking about. That's a longer stream strategy effort. So
Yeah,
that's the easy one. The hard one is how to develop the relationships and find the right person. That takes a lot of digging and talking to people. And it's persistence, basically.
One thing that we've been doing for a few years now, and it takes years to build, it's not overnight, is like a stakeholder mapping, similar to what we do for, like when we're talking to families, and when you think of research focusing on clinicians or families, which is a type of group of stakeholders or interest parties that we know more, right? So we're more familiar with, it's easier to map this group. But with decision makers, what we do is identify, like, that's it. So start thinking, okay, who would care about this, right? What ministry at what level? Is it a federal level matter? Is it a provincial level matter? Is it a municipal level matter? If you're talking of public policy, government per se. Or is it a local, like, is it for the health systems administrator level that cares more about that? And then based on that, like do the homework of trying to find, so if it's a federal level ministries have mandate letters that are produced every time a new ministry is appointed. They have a mandate letter which gives more or less good clues of what they will be worried about. And often we contact them and say, okay, we have this expertise, and is there anything that you're doing that aligns with that? And we try to produce things that align with that. Budgets, so both for municipal, so for example, City of Montreal had a strategic planning, had a budget line for accessibility strategic planning. So we see what on that budget might relate to the information that we might have in research. Provincial level, same thing. Like budgets speak a lot, like, and they have to be produced in advance, and they say where the attention of government will be and where they might need information that could help steering their actions. And then you contact people. Once you have an initial contact there, it's easier to have the next and then eventually to be called to inform or to be part of those tables and be available to events. Like public consultations is another good space. Like every level of government does public consultations. And if you participate in those, you listen what the questions they're asking to the public, and then eventually you can become part of this conversation as well by both. So there's the pull and the push, both by getting what they need and seeing what you have that may respond to those needs, but also trying to ask them, hey, I could produce that, and can you is there anything I can do to help? Or as some of the government people or the stakeholders, the civil society organizations and advocacy groups are also groups that are way more in tune with what's happening in government. We are paying attention on research. They are paying attention on what's important for they. So for them as citizens. So I think that's another good place to find people and connections. Roberta, you want to add?
Yeah, just a couple of examples for you, Simone. So if you're talking about a government policy, so one source of information for us is the Parliament of Canada website. So now there you have access to the Senate and House of Commons, so you can see the bills that are passing there. So, and then another source is really navigate the provincial websites and the territories, so the government and see what they are talking about, as Arya said, and see how your research can fit their needs.
Amazing. These answers have been so helpful, and it's just a new way of, I think, thinking about what we're doing and what we can be doing to sort of make our way, which is awesome. Thanks.
Martin, I don't know if you want to add on that. Like, I think the way that TAC also established the community partnerships to get to the policy, like through the community needs, is very unique.
Yes, I mean, I think that what we've tried to do, and I think what the Partners for Change now is trying to do it in a more concerted way, but this has been something the network's been doing for a few years, is also establishing partnerships with community members. So for example, one of the things that a big partnership that we're developing right now is with a school in Montreal, the Giant Step School, which is a school for autistic individuals, but then also has employment programs for adults and so on, and a lot of clear links out to policymakers and different people in government. So that's one of the ways that we've been doing that. We also will organize kind of big roundtables around specific themes and reach out to researchers and partners in that way to kind of gather and have conversation around specific topics that are of interest. So that's some of the other ways that we've been doing that.
Are there any other questions or comments? If there are none, I don't see anything in the chat. So if there are no more questions, then I will invite you all. So for those of you, either if you are a Child Bride member or not, just to remind you that so for the Policy Hub, we are open to have you work in the working group, in the steering committee, but the working group is where the action is at and where we always need hands. We are trying to both push information that is coming from the research projects to the policy places where they belong, and also through the consultants from the KM committee, but also to pull, so to see, identify, like view C35 that we did this year, and others like the Article 7 of the Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities that we are contributing to the parallel report. There's always different initiatives that we are trying to see what are some of those policy happenings and trying to respond, and with both our research and research from others, but that relate and are important to the community. So if you want to learn more, please do come to contact Roberta or Alix. And if you want to participate, there's always room for more hands and more brains to contribute to that. Roberta's email is on the chat. You can contact her and participate. We are also partnering with CanArt, and so everybody, all the trainees, researchers, whoever is interested, community, parent partners, everybody's involved, is invited to participate in the KT2 policy series. There's a training series happening at CanArt, and as partners from Child Bright, you are welcome to participate. You can also contact Roberta to have more information, or Alix. And the KT2 policy series will start in January. There'll be a journal club, and with KT and policy related readings and articles to comment, and a lecture series with lots of space for learning and exchange on more deep dives on policy topics. So and Martin, thank you. Put the link there on so you can sign up, register, be part of it in these conversations if you want to learn more. The KM program from Child Bright will also be Stephanie and others will be working on a toolkit, traffic light for strategists, KM strategists for policy. So stay tuned. This will be up soon. And am I forgetting anything, Alix or Roberta, in terms of strategies that people can join if you want to learn more about it?
Yeah, I just want to add that for the research teams at Child Bright, that the Policy Hub is open for business. So if you want to learn more about the Policy Hub, or if you have a project that you'd like to reach your audience and think about, your goals and what is your audience, if there is a policymaker, please reach us and I will be happy to assist you.
And for families too, for parent partners, we really, we have been working in all those initiatives with parent partners. And the role of actually lived experience and even like testimonies into policy briefs, it's, I would say, equally important, as important as the research data. Every brief we produce, like when there are stories, and every an area can confirm that, like for decision makers at different levels, one thing is learning about that, and research and numbers are important, but having even the relationship or having the conversation with people with lived experiences, it changes, it gives way more weight to the information that is being conveyed. So parent, and I like Ari's agreeing, so I don't think it's I've heard that from many different people in decision-making positions. So for parent partners here, if you want to be more involved, please reach out. We're happy to, and we need to have those collaborations to make messages more visible.
The more that you can talk about what you're doing in terms of children, youth, parents, caregivers, and how you can help them, not help the government, better off you are. Your job here is not to sell what you're doing, it's to help somebody accomplish something. So the people you're really helping are children, youth, parents, caregivers, etc. So the more you position whatever interactions you have that way, it just increases your chance of making a connection to someone because it's more personalized. And it's true, like that is what the value is.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, and it's that conversation I have with my students sometimes. It's like we may think that policymakers have other motive to be doing the and as you said, like it is there are politics and there are budgets constraints and whatnot, but people in public positions often do want to do what's good and what's right and help and contribute in their ways as well. So the more we can convey the messages that that's the final goal for everybody. It's the final goal for research, and it's the final goal for decision making as well. So I think everybody wants to work in this direction. We have to be more open to develop those relationships and to inform those processes in more intentional ways. I don't know, Martin, do you have any final words that you want to wrap up? Well, we are, no, I just realized. Sorry. Anyone has anything else to say? If not, please do complete the survey that Alex put on the chat if you can. It's always good. We are always in the KM program. We're always trying to evaluate everything we do to make sure it has reached its purpose or that what can be changed. That's the first series of Let's Talk KM. That is finishing. I think there's one more Let's Talk KM or that's done. But sorry.
Yeah, it's the last one.
It's the last one on the series. So please complete the survey, email us, and it was a pleasure having you all. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Just wanted to say thank you for inviting me to take part in this. This was